I call the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure to order. Let me start off by saying to my fellow members of HASC, glad to see you're up and at 'em. Mr. Lobo, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Garamendi. Where's Mr. Garamendi? I know I saw him. He's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And Mr. Larson and I were up until 4:45. I don't remember. The clock was blurry at 4:45 in the morning. 5 o'clock was the final. So if we look a little haggard, that's because we are. We got coffee. We have good coffee. We have good coffee on our side. Again, thanks for getting up early, or in Mr. Lobiano's case, I don't think he ever went to bed. So we'll try to we won't let you speak too much today.
Sleep is overrated.
Today, the committee will consider H.R. 1987, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2015, H.R. 1642 to designate the building utilized as a United States courthouse located at 150 Reed Circle in Greenville, North Carolina, as the Randy D. Daub United States Courthouse, and General Services Administration Capital Investment and Leasing Program resolutions. I now recognize Mr. Hunter for a motion.
Pursuant to Rule 1A1 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I move that the Chairman be authorized to declare recesses during today's markup.
Question is on the motion. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Our first order of business is to consider H.R. 1987, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2015. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation and call up 1987, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Hunter and Ranking Member DeFazio and Garamendi for all the work they have put into H.R. 1987, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2015. I know considerable compromises were made on all sides, and so I appreciate both sides working together in this manner. Nonetheless, I believe we all share the goal of authorizing funding for the Coast Guard at adequate levels to carry out their many missions, and this bill does that. I look forward to quickly reporting it from committee today. I now turn to Subcommittee Chairman Hunter to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank the professional staff, John and Jeff, and the Coast Guard, Joanne, and the other professional staff that helped us on this. We had a lot of hearings, and I'd also like to thank the few of the members who showed up to those hearings, and they really are the few and the proud. H.R. 1987, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2015, reauthorizes funding for the Coast Guard and the Federal Maritime Commission through fiscal year 2017 at fiscally responsible levels. The bill also makes several reforms to Coast Guard authorities as well as laws governing shipping and navigation. Specifically, H.R. 1987 supports Coast Guard service members by authorizing sufficient funds for military pay raises and enhanced military benefits, improves Coast Guard mission effectiveness by realigning Coast Guard leadership and modernizing Coast Guard assets in a cost-effective manner, enhances oversight of the Coast Guard, reduces inefficient operations, and saves taxpayer dollars by making common-sense reforms to Coast Guard missions and administration, encourages job growth in the maritime sector by cutting regulatory burdens on job creators and improving the enforcement of our cargo preference laws. It also reforms the operation of the FMC. H.R. 1987 includes many provisions that came as a result of our subcommittee's strong record of oversight. It is a bipartisan effort that was put together in close consultation with the minority. It includes language requested by Republican and Democrat members. I want to thank Ranking Members DeFazio and Garamendi for their efforts and Chairman Schuster for his leadership. I urge all members to support the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. DeFazio for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for scheduling this markup for the Coast Guard authorization. I think this reflects the best of this committee, genuine collaboration between the majority and the minority in the national interest, and I am a proud original co-sponsor. This legislation continues to demonstrate that under your leadership, this committee remains dedicated to working cooperatively, not confrontationally, and to advance transportation policy initiatives that are in the best interests of our nation. I'm particularly pleased to note legislation reauthorizes vital funding for the Coast Guard next 2 years. Considering the budget uncertainties the Coast Guard has experienced over the past several years, legislation will provide a measure of budget stability for the Coast Guard, which is a welcome change, though I would wish that it was at higher levels, a subject for another discussion. Nevertheless, because they do have critical needs that remain unmet, and perhaps none greater than the need to recapitalize its fleet of polar-class icebreakers. At the moment, only the United States and Russia have heavy icebreaking capability, and we're down to one ship, which is cannibalizing parts off the other ship, which is cold berthed. We're years away from a new icebreaker. This legislation directs the Coast Guard to complete the material condition assessment of its heavy icebreaker, Polar Sea, and make a determination whether to reactivate the vessel, begin a service life extension, or as I would describe it, a gut and stuff. I visited the icebreaker. It has a unique hull. The ice band is made out of alloys that are no longer available, that are superior to modern alloys for icebreaking, because they provide the durability but a little more flexibility than some of the newer materials. I believe that we need to look very hard, and I think we could move much more expeditiously if we determined that it would be cost-effective to basically re-engine it, redo it, and then we'd also have more spare parts for the Polar Sea, particularly some of the 1960s transistor boards, which we apparently can't make either. I'm also pleased that the legislation advances policy initiatives of great interest to my constituents, ensuring the Coast Guard maintains search and rescue off the Oregon coast. It addresses the Coast Guard's licensing and documentation activities, common sense reforms there. This legislation directs the Government Accountability Office to examine how the Coast Guard might improve efficiency and performance at the Documentation Center, which was spirited away to West Virginia by Senator Byrd. Not quite certain that makes sense or is economic. Mr. Chairman, in closing, allow me once again to thank you and Coast Guard Subcommittee Chair Hunter, Ranking Member John Garamendi, and for your cooperation in drafting and moving this important legislation.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Garamendi. He's operating on, what, 4 hours of sleep, maybe?
Yeah, but I gave him some of that coffee.
Yep, I have terrific coffee, and you too, sir. You were there right into the night, along with a couple of our other members on the committee. We have some work to do here today, and it's good to be with all of you. I want to echo Mr. DeFazio's in thanking you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleague, Duncan Hunter, the Chairman of the Coast Guard Maritime Subcommittee. It's good to be here. Let's get this thing done. It's fitting and appropriate. At the same week, the Armed Services Committee is marking up the National Defense Authorization Act until 5 o'clock this morning, to be exact. This committee is also taking up the Coast Guard, the 5th military service branch. I want to acknowledge and thank Chairman Hunter for being very open and collaborative in the process we've engaged in throughout the development of the legislation. It's a pleasure to work with Chairman Hunter and the majority staff. It's even a greater pleasure to work with the minority staff. They're close. And we made some improvements to the proposals along the way. We're going to expand providing the Coast Guard with some certainty over the next 2 years, and also create greater opportunities for the U.S. maritime industry. I'm particularly pleased this legislation will provide stability in the budget. Erratic budgets and perpetual continuing resolutions have had a very deleterious effect on the Coast Guard, most notably impacting the Coast Guard's ability to keep pace with its long-term program to recapitalize its aging fleet of surface and air assets. The authorizing funding levels in the bill, especially for the acquisition, construction, and improvement account, is much better, approximating the funding levels the Coast Guard says it needs to maintain its acquisition tempo, with one exception, the icebreaker, which Mr. DeFazio talked about a moment ago. I'm optimistic that all of this will send a strong signal to our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to do better by the Coast Guard. I'm also supportive of the new requirements in the bill to initiate long-term capital planning and also to require better assessments of mission performance metrics, authorizing new pilot programs to test new communications and vessel management systems. These provisions will all strengthen the Coast Guard's performance. The bill also contains provisions important to our seafarers and the maritime industry, provisions that would harmonize the renewal of the different mariner credentials and allow greater flexibility for mariners' medical certifications. It should be much more convenient for America's mariners. The bill also further advances my very strong interest in using the nascent U.S. LNG export trade, which will actually begin sometime late this fall, as a springboard to provide new economic opportunities for our shipyards and merchant marine to grow and to fly the U.S. flag. Very simply put, if we're going to export one of our great national assets, natural gas, then we ought to also use that export to enhance another extremely important national strategic asset, which is our merchant marine. Could lead to the construction of several hundred ships in our shipyards, both for the Jones trade as well as for the international trade. This legislation would require the Secretary of Transportation to develop guidelines to implement a program to promote the use of the U.S. flag vessels and U.S. seafarers in the LNG trade. It also represents an important step forward, and I urge the members to take a strong look at this and to join in building up our merchant marine from the current less than 100 to maybe a couple hundred or even a few hundred. Mr. Chairman, in closing, this legislation is balanced, it's responsible, it's forward-thinking. It tends to the needs of our Coast Guard and makes helpful changes to address issues and concerns raised by the maritime stakeholders. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor, and I urge members to support the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Mundy.
Blasio for the coffee.
I also want to recognize that Mr. Larson's here. He had a couple hours of sleep. You look like you only had a couple
I
hours.
assume you're just recognizing that I'm actually here as opposed to having anything to say just yet. But it's good to see. It's good to see everyone I saw last night, a mere 5 hours ago as well. This morning.
Right.
This morning. Yeah.
Glad you made it.
Thanks.
And now, do any of the members wish to be recognized? Ms. Gentlelady from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr.
Laura?
Chairman. Just to follow up on what everybody's talking about here, talking about ice-breaking vessels for the Coast Guard, let me just chime in and certainly thank yourself and Chairman Hunter and the ranking members for putting new language in here authorizing the design and build of a new ice-breaking vessel, actually on the Great Lakes. Of course, we've had some, with the polar vortex, had some particularly brutal winters for the last 2 winters. 2 years ago, 92% of the Great Lakes were covered in ice, which was a historic high ever, since we've been recording anyway. This year, 89% of the Great Lakes. And so it is absolutely so important for the all of the 8 Great Lakes states, as well as the 2 provinces from Canada, who their Coast Guard does work very closely with the United States Coast Guard in trying to keep our commercial shipping going there. We currently, the Coast Guard has 9 ice-breaking capable cutters, 6 of them, and they're all in about the 35-year-old range, so they're very old. They conduct about 11,000 operational hours every year, and about 80% of those operational hours, actually in the last year, were used for ice breaking. As I mentioned, we had this just unbelievable. If you look at some of these pictures from an aerial photograph of what happened with the ice cover on the Great Lakes, it really is quite something. But I would just mention that it's you know, a very, very important, a critical component of the economy, not just for the Great Lakes states in that region, but for the entire nation. Last year, I was actually on one of the Coast Guard cutters, Hollyhock, when they went out. I have a Coast Guard station, a couple of them actually in my district. But anyway, we went out on an ice-breaking mission, and it was just an interesting thing. And I would close on this. Actually, it's much harder to break freshwater ice than it is ocean ice. I mean, the brash ice. The freshwater is so much harder, and there's a whole different art form to it all. And one of the terms that the admirals were using, they said, "Ma'am, we call this this particular mission here, we call it back and ram." And I thought, you know, even I can understand what that means. Back up and ram the ice. Back and ram. But anyway, they were talking because a number of them had been up in the polar areas and in the different kinds of ice. But with that, let me just say that, again, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this reauthorization, and I certainly appreciate this language as well for the Great Lakes ice cutters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we will now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Hunter is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1 offered by Mr. Hunter.
And recognize Mr. Hunter to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the reasons we went until 5 a.m. is because we had 300 amendments last night. This is going to wrap a lot of those up, so we don't have that happen here. Mr. Chairman, the manager's amendment that I am offering would make further amendments to current law as well as the underlying bill. It also includes 2 provisions from Mr. Garamendi, one to improve a training program that helps prepare U.S. mariners for work on U.S. flagged vessels, and one to audit the proceeds from the sale of vessels in the National Defense Reserve Fleet. Language authored by Mr. Young that would provide for the conveyance of a parcel of excess Coast Guard property in Alaska to a nonprofit at fair market value. An amendment by Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Nolan regarding the safe operations of vessels on the Great Lakes. An amendment by Mr. Graves of Louisiana concerning a cost comparison between constructing and leasing a new polar icebreaker. Language authored by Mr. Larson and Mr. Young concerning the classification of fishing vessels. This amendment was prepared in very close cooperation with the minority, and I want to thank again the ranking members DeFazio and Garamendi for their assistance. I urge all members to support the manager's amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Anybody else wish to be heard on the amendment? Mr. Fazio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the subcommittee chairman for his work on this, particularly support the provision regarding the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a cost comparison of various options for polar ice breaking, and appreciate the inclusion of Mr. Larson's provision for the fishing industry with the adoption of newer, safer fishing vessels. We have the same goals, but we have to make sure the federal rules are workable. And in this case, the goal is safer small vessels, but we need to revisit some of the complications that have arisen. So thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Garamendi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my strong support for Chairman Hunter's amendments and urge its adoption. Just like the underlying bill, this amendment was developed in the same open, collaborative, cooperative process. The amendment will improve the legislation in several ways. I'll touch on only a couple of those. The First Amendment includes clarification to my provisions, Section 313 of the bill, to ensure that when opportunities arrive for U.S. flagged vessels to export LNG, there will be credentialed U.S. seafarers ready and available to serve on those vessels. The amendment amends earlier provisions to ensure the guidelines developed by the Secretary of Transportation include incentives to provide opportunities for our mariners, seafarers to meet the minimum sea service requirements, and then provides direction to ensure that public-private maritime training institutions have the requisite training curricula, and that our sea service veterans are made aware of the opportunities to serve this country once again in the Merchant Marines. The second provision of the amendment would direct the Government Accountability Office to conduct an audit of the Maritime Administration's use and disbursement of ship recycling program revenue. This was discussed by Mr. Hunter. The program funds are derived from the sale of the obsolete vessels in the National Defense Reserve Fleet. We're concerned about where that money winds up. We need also to ensure that MARAD's administration funds meet the intent of Congress, and the audit will be useful in that regard. Mr. Chairman, that ends my statement. I was handed a statement by Mr. Elijah Cummings, and with your permission or consent, I would enter his remarks into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Recognize Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there was an upside to staying up till 4:30 last night, is it gave us time to work on the amendment on the classification of fishing vessels. So I want to thank the T&I staff for being willing to work with us throughout the evening last night to get this done. I have a statement for the record. It lays out what the problem is, what the solution we came up with, and the benefit it will provide. All that for the record. So if folks are more interested in the details, they can read my statement. But with unanimous consent, because my mind is so muddy right now, I'm not sure I could read this thing anyway after yesterday's markup. So with that, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Do any other members wish to be heard on the amendment? Seeing none, are there amendments to the amendment? Not yet. Amendments to the amendment? Seeing no member, recognize Mr. Hunter. Hunter? Statement? Okay, then we just go right through. Yeah.
Questions on
It's going to be a rough morning and a rough day. If no other amendments to the amendment, if not, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Before we get to any other amendments, just want to remind members that we've set up a deadline for 1 p.m. the day before a markup for amendments. And we do this to make sure that members of the committee have a chance to look at any amendments, review them for consideration before the markup. And all of our amendments on the Coast Guard bill were received after the deadline. And, we're going to have a couple of major bills coming up here, so I just urge everybody, as courtesy to other members, get them in on the deadline. And we're doing a much larger bill. We'll probably be a lot tighter on the time limit. So, again, just a gentle reminder. With that, are there any other amendments? Ms. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Without objection, so ordered, the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, offered by Ms. Brown.
Now recognize Ms. Brown to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Coast Guard personnel who are serving in our state of Florida do a wonderful job, and I'm truly appreciative of the hard work and dedication of these fine service members. After 9/11, they were the first agency on the ground assisting with the disaster. Today, I'm offering an amendment covering provisions that was included in the base bill of the last 2 Coast Guard reauthorization bill. Both passed this committee by voice vote and passed the House without objections. The provision of this amendment will provide an element of fairness for both the cruise industry and their workers to ensure that seamen get their full pay while protecting the employers from unfair legal actions. Including these provisions in the bill will also make certain that the law is being followed as directed by our committee. In the 111th Congress, under former Chairman James Overstar leadership, Congress modified the penalty wage statute for seamen. The Coast Guard Reauthorization Bill of 2010, amending the penalty wage caps that seamen could receive from a class action lawsuit 10 times the disputed amount. That is 8 times more than any employer currently working in the United States. These changes was meant to bring maritime law into the modern era and recognizing the positive change that has taken place in employment rights. However, individual suits was left out of the bill, creating an unfair process. The recourse for non-citizen provision was also included in the 2011 and 2013 Coast Guard authorization, which passed the House without objection. The proposed recourse for non-citizens would not leave crew members without remedy. These provisions merely limit the ability of foreign crew members working on foreign ships to sue in U.S. courts when a remedy is not available abroad. The provisions simply change the location where disputes follow foreign employees. This has nothing to do with medical care, and it doesn't affect it in any way. Basically, these are clarifying amendments, and with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady, and with that, I recognize Mr. Micah.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes Ms. Brown and I disagree on some issues. This is one on which we concur. She's correct, in fact, that this has passed at least twice. There are some people that do game the system as far as penalty wages, and they're non-citizens. And this does straighten things out, and there is a bipartisan agreement on it. We passed it before. So I concur with the gentlelady's amendment.
I thank the gentleman. And with that, Mr. Garamundi is recognized.
We might call upon the memory of the members. This is the third year that we've debated this issue, and it continues on. I don't want to rehash all of it. We did enough of that last night. We simply differ on the proposed policy changes. I've asked the cruise line industry for data demonstrating the necessity for this, and I've received no information at all from the cruise line industry that there's even a problem to be addressed. I asked the American Labor Law Division at the Congressional Research Service to conduct a survey of U.S. penalty wage claims over the past 3 years. The result, there were only a dozen cases, most of which were dismissed or denied by the court. There's no run to the courthouse here, nor does it constitute a legitimate financial threat to Carnival Corporation, which in 2014 generated $15.5 billion in revenue, or to Royal Caribbean, which generated more than $8 billion in revenue. So it's not going to bankrupt them that they actually have to pay wages. The purported threat to the cruise industry is a mirage. There is, however, a real threat to seafarers on cruise ships that would be confronted with the very difficult process that this amendment would provide them with should they not be paid or paid according to what they thought was their contractual obligation. Enough for me. I just want to read one part of a paragraph from organizations. This is the Seamen's Church Institute. It's in New York. The letter is signed by about 20 different organizations, most of them church-based, that provide services to seamen in the ports around the United States. And this is one sentence that I think is useful, or one paragraph. There's no law, and I quote this, there is no law that better expresses what America stands for or that confirms American values than the United States Penalty Wage Act, first enacted by Congress in 1790 and strengthened in 1872, 1898, and 1915 to bolster seafarers' protection. The statute simply requires ship owners to pay seafarers their earned wages promptly. Why we would want to blow a hole in a long-term tradition of American law to protect seafarers, I don't understand. But what I do understand is that there's going to be potential harm to men and women that arrive at our ports and claim that they have not been adequately paid according to their contract. I'll let it go at that, Mr. Chairman. I suspect this will pass, but I would hope that people would just pay attention to the seafarers and understand that the cruise ship owners are in known danger, financially or otherwise, by maintaining the present law. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. With that, recognize Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I support this amendment. I think it adds two common-sense reforms to maritime liability laws. I think it smartly updates, as the gentleman said, an over 100-year-old law that needs to be updated, and I commend the gentlelady's leadership on this issue and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to be recognized on this amendment? Seeing none, are there
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry, Mr. DeFazio.
I don't seek to be recognized except to enter the remarks on this amendment from Congressman Nadler.
Without objection, so ordered.
He's in opposition.
Mr. Germundi appears to have a statement. Microphone.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Same request to enter into the record the letter from the Seamen's Church Institute and the dozens of other churches that provide the services to these seamen.
Without objection, so ordered. Are there amendments to the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other members? Ms. Hahn is recognized for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment on the desk, and I ask unanimous consent to have it approved as read.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 27, offered by Ms. Hahn.
Ms. Hahn is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A huge part of our maritime industry over the years has been the participation of our merchant mariners. And This is an issue that I have been working on long before I came to Congress, almost 14 years now, when I was on the City Council in Los Angeles. And this amendment would finally repay the debts to the surviving World War II members of the Merchant Marine. During World War II, millions of Americans in uniform fought bravely to secure freedom and peace throughout the world, and we honored their sacrifices by ensuring that we took care of them when they came home through initiatives such as the GI Bill and other services meant to support our veterans. However, our U.S. merchant mariners were not included in these benefits. The U.S. Merchant Marine were responsible for transporting troops, delivering supplies for the military in hostile areas. And in the words of our President Franklin D. Roosevelt, they completed the most difficult and dangerous transportation job ever undertaken. And as time goes on, there will be greater public understanding of our merchant fleet's record during this war. Hundreds of ships, thousands of men were lost to enemy submarines and aircraft, including dangerous missions ferrying supplies to Western Europe and even Russia. It was one of the most critical roles played during the early part of that war. And then General Dwight Eisenhower put it, "When final victory is ours, there is no organization that will share its credit more deservedly than the Merchant Marine." Unfortunately, those who served this nation so valiantly during that time were not eligible for the GI Bill that helped millions of veterans go to college, secure a home, transition seamlessly into civilian life. The fact that we did not provide similar benefits to those who risked their lives for this country is simply unfathomable. And for too long, we failed to fulfill our promise to them. And with only 5,000 remaining survivors, it is now or never to right this wrong. That's why I'm offering this amendment to the Coast Guard Authorization Act. I've tried everything. This amendment is based on a very similar piece of legislation I've introduced with my colleague, John Duncan, called the Honoring Our World War II Merchant Marine Act of 2015. This amendment would provide a one-time benefit of $25,000 to the surviving 5,000 World War II mariners. In just the last 2 years, the number of surviving merchant mariners has been cut in half. And if we fail to act now, none of them will see the promise that we made to them fulfilled. Providing this modest benefit, we will finally be giving our brave merchant mariners the recognition that they rightfully deserve. And with this, I reserve the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. Now recognize Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agreed to be the lead co-sponsor of this legislation and this amendment because of my great respect for Ms. Hahn, but even more importantly, because of my great appreciation for the tremendous service provided for those by those members of the Merchant Marine. And Ms. Hahn's already spoken of the great danger that these people were put in during the war, and what Franklin Roosevelt said about that, and about the tremendous contribution to the American victory in World War II that President Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, mentioned at the time. So I think most people know that in my entire time in Congress, I've been one of the most fiscally conservative members here, and generally I support and co-sponsor amendments to cut spending, but I think this is one of the most important, most legitimate amendments that I've seen since I've been here. We all try to do as much for our veterans as we can. We do far more in this country for our veterans by far than any other country, and we want that to be, but we've never done anything for these veterans of the Merchant Marine, and we really should try to do something, and I appreciate the Chairman's willingness to work with us on this as well, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. With that, Mr. Hunter is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I appreciate the gentlelady's leadership and commitment and the gentleman's leadership and commitment to this issue, I can't support the amendment. I will say, though, could you imagine before the war even started having to brave the Atlantic without battleships or cruisers next to you getting picked off like apples in a barrel by the Nazi subs. I mean, these guys were truly courageous. You had nearly 1 in 26 mariners died in the line of duty during World War II. That's a higher percentage than any other service in the war. So while it is certainly proper that surviving merchant mariners receive recognition for their service to our nation, the bill before us today is not the proper vehicle to accomplish the goal. The Secretary of Homeland Security should not be charged with administering a veterans benefit program, nor should critical Homeland Security funding be diverted for this purpose. I think if this is to be done, it needs to be done in either the Veterans Committee or the Armed Services Committee. I think both of those committees have jurisdiction over government agencies that actually serve benefits and can manage this and probably have a closer tie to the merchant mariners who we're honoring and who were given this benefit to. Furthermore, the amendment creates a new government program that is not offset, which unfortunately violates discretionary pay-go rules. This means that leadership could not even schedule this bill for consideration by the House. If the gentlelady would withdraw the amendment, I pledge to work with her and the Veterans Committee and even the Armed Services Committee, especially with those of us that are on both committees in the future. With that, I yield back.
Well, the gentlelady should be recognized. Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate everybody's remarks this morning, and I clearly believe that at least we agree on the concept that these surviving veterans deserve this wrong to be made right. And I think, as I expressed, I'm trying every way possible to make this happen. Before I leave Congress next year, there was 2 things I wanted to accomplish. One was making sure the harbor maintenance tax was fully given back to our ports in this country. And last night on the floor, my amendment with Huizinga accomplished 2016's level of funding back to our ports. So I feel good about that. And the other thing I wanted to do was really right this wrong. And apparently this is the wrong place to do that. And I will withdraw this amendment, and I will hold you to your promise, Mr. Duncan.
I look forward to being held.
Duncan Hunter, and thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I know you also expressed the fact that you would help me as well, and I'm going to hold you to that as well.
I thank the gentlelady for withdrawing, and I'll reaffirm my commitment to you also that this is the right thing to do. It's not the right committee to do it in, and I committed working with you to either the Veterans Committee or the NDAA is the appropriate place, Armed Services Committee, the appropriate place to do this, to right this wrong. So again, thank you very much, and also for your passion in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. We're slowly inching it up. Hopefully, the day will come. 100% of it will be used for what its intended purposes are. So I thank you, gentlelady, for her passion on both these issues.
Page 6.
Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, I recognize Mr. Hunter for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 1987 as amended be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill as amended is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. We will now consider H.R. 1642, a bill to designate the building utilized as a United States courthouse located at 150 Reed Circle in Greenville, North Carolina, as the Randy D. Daub United States Courthouse. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development Subcommittee and call up H.R. 1642 and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Crawford to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 1642 would designate the building used as United States Courthouse located at 150 Reed Circle in Greenville, North Carolina as the Randy D. Daub United States Courthouse. Judge Randy D. Daub was in the private practice of law for 26 years in Greenville, North Carolina. From 1985 until 1990, Judge Daub served on the North Carolina Board of Transportation. In 2006, he was appointed by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals as a U.S. bankruptcy judge and served as chief judge from 2007 to 2014. Sadly, earlier this year, Judge Daub passed away suddenly. He was a well-respected bankruptcy attorney and jurist, which is exemplified by the fact that this bill is sponsored by the entire North Carolina delegation. I think it is fitting to recognize his service to the law and to the community by naming this courthouse after him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. DeFazio. Mr. Carson is recognized for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As was mentioned, Judge Daub was a federal bankruptcy judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina. He spent most of his career in private practice, actively representing debtors and creditors, and served as Chapter 7 bankruptcy trustee for 15 years. He was certainly an accomplished attorney and active member of the National Association of Bankruptcy Trustees. He will be remembered by his colleagues as a fair jurist who stood up for struggling homeowners in financial distress. And because of Judge Daub's role in his community and his service as a bankruptcy judge, Mr. Chairman, I support naming the courthouse in Greenville, North Carolina as the Randy D. Daub United States Courthouse. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we'll now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Crawford for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1642 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and reported favorably to the House. We will now consider two General Service Administration Capital Investment and Leasing Program resolutions. I ask unanimous consent to call up the resolutions in block, that they be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Seeing none, it's so ordered. I recognize Mr. Crawford now to explain the resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're considering two GSA resolutions from GSA's fiscal years 2014 and 2015 capital investment and leasing programs. The consolidation activities prospectus includes various projects that will reduce the amount of office space, reduce costs to the taxpayer, and improve space utilization. The authorization of $70 million is more than offset by the potential savings of more than $100 million in avoided lease costs. The second project will consolidate FBI offices in Puerto Rico into one facility. This project has been further reduced to work within appropriated funding levels. These projects, as amended by the resolutions, are fully funded and represent potential savings for the taxpayer. I urge the committee to approve these GSA resolutions, and I yield back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Mr. Carson for a statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Today we have two GSA resolutions for consideration. They will authorize a construction project and several consolidation projects across the country. I commend GSA, Mr. Chairman, for their commitment to work with the executive branch agencies to reduce the federal real estate footprint. The administration continues to submit projects, Mr. Chairman, that improve space utilization for federal agencies, and many of the consolidation projects before us today involve moving agencies out of expensive private leases into smaller, less expensive space in federally owned buildings. As the federal government's landlord, GSA has a responsibility to guide agencies toward making good real estate decisions that are cost effective. I am pleased that there are real savings for taxpayers in the projects under construction today. I support these resolutions, Mr. Chairman, and I urge members of this committee to do the same. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we'll consider the resolution for amendment. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Crawford for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the two committee resolutions be approved en bloc.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolutions are approved. I ask unanimous consent that each bill ordered reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted without objection. So ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to each of the bills ordered reported today, and each committee resolution adopted today to reflect the actions of the committee. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman, after consultation with the ranking member, has the authority to strike or revise any provisions of the bill ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee or that would cause the bills to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 cut-go point of order. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the committee authorize the chairman or his designee to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on H.R. 1987 as amended, H.R. 1642, ordered reported by the committee today, or similar Senate bills. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 5 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Chair notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken on all committee business today. And with that, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee has completed its business and is adjourned.